Okay, it is time to begin, and so we will. Uh, Please turn with me to Mark chapter 6. We'll begin this evening with a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the power of your word to point us to Jesus, to help us see him clearly, and to see in the Gospels who he is and what he came to do and what he means in our lives, and to see more clearly what kind of people you want us to be and what you want us to be as disciples of his. We ask that this evening that you will open our minds, open our hearts to Jesus in your word. In his name we pray. Amen. Okay. Mark chapter 6. We started this last week, and I want to mention one thing that's that we started last week, but it has implications for today. We went down through verse 13 last week. In 7 through 13, we have Jesus sending out the 12 apostles on a mission. And the background to this goes all the way back to chapter 3, where he chose the 12, and he chose them to be with him, and so that he might send them out to teach, to cast out demons, to heal people. So the 12 have a unique role in the church from the very beginning until now. We've already noticed that the number 12 is symbolic, and this is something that carries on all through the Gospels, and in the Gospel of Mark, and it's symbolic of the new Israel, as the old Israel had 12 patriarchs that gave birth to 12 tribes. So the new Israel is in a sense patterned, or the 12 is symbolic of a new Israel that dawns with Jesus the Messiah. And we won't go into that at this point, but he embodies what Israel is meant to be. So Jesus has chosen the 12. He sends the 12 out. They are on a mission. If you think about what they're doing, they're preaching repentance. They are healing people. They're casting out demons. That's exactly the sort of things that Jesus did. He sends them out on a mission, imitating him. And it is by his power and his authority that they are able to do these things. Now, at this point in verses 7 through 13, he sends them out. And then if you drop down to verse 30, they come back. This is another one of the sandwiches, the sandwich technique that we've seen in Mark before. And so he sends them out and they come back. In between, we have a section about the death of John the Baptist, which is a flashback that's already taken place. And this mission gives birth to this discussion of John the Baptist. And we'll see how that works. And one of the things we've noticed in the past is when you have this sandwiching technique used, what's in the center relates to what happens on each end of it. So be aware of that, and we'll talk more about that at the end. But at this point, remember, Jesus has sent the 12 out in twos, in teams of two, and then we pick up in verse 14. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some said, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others said he is Elijah, and others said he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison, and for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death, but she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. For when Herodias's daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. And he vowed to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you up to half of my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, for what should I ask? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. And she came in immediately with haste to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was greatly sorry. But because of his oaths and his guests, he did not want to break his word to her. And immediately the king sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in prison and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard of it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Now, Jesus has caused quite a stir, and finally, I think it's because of his efforts have been multiplied by sending out these 6 teams of apostles, and it comes to Herod's attention. Now, something that may be kind of subtle here, but I think it's very instructive. When John the Baptist was alive, he did not perform miracles. Sometimes we may just not think about it. I mean, he was a prophet after all. He was a powerful preacher. He didn't perform miracles, and we know that because this says, verse 14, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. So there was a popular belief, and there's some textual evidence for, rather than it being some people who are saying this, it's Herod who's saying it, and that's probably more likely, but it's not a big deal, because we have Herod saying essentially the same thing a little later. And so the thinking is, John didn't perform miracles when he was alive, but now that he's been raised from the dead, there are miraculous powers at work in him. So there's all kinds of speculation about who Jesus is. Some of them say he's John the Baptist raised from the dead. Some people say he's Elijah. Some people say he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But Herod himself is convinced this is John whom I beheaded, and he's been raised from the dead. Now, this could just be, it could be that he's being facetious, but I don't think so. I think it's Herod's guilty conscience working on him. And by the way, this Herod is not the Herod that massacred the babies in Bethlehem. This is one of his sons. This is Herod Antipas. Following the death of Herod the Great, who was the one who killed the babies in Bethlehem and tried to do away with Jesus as an infant, his kingdom was divided up. And officially, Herod Antipas was not a king. He's called a king here. Officially, he was not, but in popular terminology, they called him a king. Okay, as far as the Romans were concerned, he was a tetrarch, which meant that they had divided Herod's kingdom into 4 parts, and he had one part of it. The part he had included Galilee and Perea. So Galilee, where Jesus' ministry is where Herod was ruling, but he was ruling under the direction of the Romans. He was a Roman puppet. The Herodian line, how do I want to put it? They were nothing to brag about morally, ethically, in any way you want to talk about it, except they were, Herod the Great had been a great builder, and Herod Antipas wasn't as great a builder as Herod the Great, but he was a pretty good builder himself. But they were unscrupulous. They were cruel. They were immoral. And John the Baptist zeroes in on that. John the Baptist is a great example of speaking truth to power. Herod has political power of life and death, and John just basically doesn't care, or he ignores it. He speaks truth to power, and the truth he speaks to power is that it's not right for Herod to have his wife Herodias. Now, the background to that is Herod Antipas had been married to the daughter of Aretas, a king to the kingdom, a king of the kingdom to the east of Galilee, the Nababean, I think is the way it was pronounced. Anyway, he was married to her, but in Rome he met Herodias and fell for her. Little problem, she was married to his half-brother Philip, not Philip the Tetrarch, another Philip. She was married to his half-brother, and he was married. Well, not a problem for one of the Herods. She wanted him to get rid of his wife. See, his father, Herod the Great, had 10 wives. And so when you see these sons, they're half brothers. The whole line was pretty messed up. But so he got rid of his wife, the King Aretas's daughter, which, let's say, displeased Aretas. And later on, Aretas attacked. He went to war with Herod Antipas and defeated him. Herod Antipas ruled from BC 4, some say 3 or 4, at the death of Herod the Great until 39. In 36, Aretas had a war with Antipas. Antipas lost very badly. The Romans weren't very pleased with this, and 3 years later they exiled Antipas and his wife Herodias to Gaul, which is while Palestine, Galilee was no great shakes, Gaul was worse. So that's kind of the background to this. So his marriage to Herodias was wrong on so many levels. She was his cousin. She was his brother's wife. He had to get rid of his other wife in order to get her. So there were a lot of levels here. And John just says it's not lawful for you to have her, which doesn't make Herod happy, and it makes Herodias downright malevolent. So Herod seizes John and he puts him in prison. Now, when I've thought about this, he does this for the sake of Herodias, but he doesn't kill him. He was kind of ambivalent. He was kind of on the fence. On the one hand, he recognized John, it says, as a righteous and holy man, and he feared him. He was even fascinated by his preaching. But he's not going to live according to it. And so he needs John out of the way. You just can't have prophets running around denouncing you. If a prophet won't behave and act politically smart, you need to get him out of the way. So he puts him in prison. But in a way, he's safer there because Herodias can't get at him because Herod's protecting him. But then she gets her chance. Herod throws a big banquet for his nobles, his military leaders, and the leading men of Galilee. Herodias's daughter comes in and dances for the gathering. Herod and his guests are pleased. He gets himself all excited in making a vow to her, saying, "Ask me for anything you wish, and I'll give it to you up to half of my kingdom." Now, this seems pretty extreme, and it is, but it's not unheard of. A little later on, the Roman Emperor Caligula will make a rash vow to Agrippa the First. And when Agrippa the First calls his hand on it, Caligula has to pay off because of his, again, because of all the people who witnessed the vow he made. And he wasn't happy about it, but he had put himself in a box, and Herod has done the same thing. So the girl goes to her mom, says, "What should I ask?" She said, "The head of John the Baptist." So the girl comes back and says, "What I want is the head of John the Baptist on a platter." Now you may wonder why on a platter. I think it seems to me there's definitely one reason for that, and there may be a second as well. For one thing, it's dark humor. This is a banquet. You have platters at a banquet. I want a platter, but what I want on the platter is John the Baptist's head, because I hate him. Okay. But there's something else too. I just throw this out of speculation. I think that makes perfect sense. But there might be a secondary thing, and that is Herodias knows that Herod doesn't want to kill John. Maybe he would spirit him away, maybe pretend he would kill him or something. But if you've got his head on a platter, then there's no doubt that he's dead. But anyway, she's eliminated him. And then the executioner goes down, cuts off his head, brings the head up on a platter, and John's disciples come and they take away the body and lay it in a tomb. Now, the question we might ask is, how does this function? All of Mark is about Jesus. It's not about John. And yet this whole incident is about John. The introduction has to do with Jesus, but it's because they think Jesus is John raised from the dead. So why is that here is a question that I ask. And I can think of two reasons. One is probably more definite than the other, but both of them are possibilities, it seems to me, and they're not mutually exclusive. Remember, John, we were introduced to him in chapter 1. He's the forerunner. He's the one who paves the way for the coming Messiah. He's the voice crying in the wilderness, making the way for the Lord to come. He precedes the Messiah. He's the predecessor. And in a way, he's the precursor, I believe, to the ultimate fate of the Messiah. John dies. John, the forerunner, dies not because he's done anything wrong, but because he's done something right. And Jesus will die the same way. There are also some parallels here, perhaps. John dies at the hand of the Romans, as seen in Herod. Jesus dies at the hand of the Romans, as seen in Pilate. Both Herod and Pilate were reluctant to kill John and Jesus. Both of them tried to, in their way, to protect Herod had tried to protect John from Herodias. Pilate tried a number of maneuvers to keep Jesus from being killed by his enemies. But in the end, both of them are trapped in their own view between what is expedient and what is right, and they choose what is expedient. There may be other parallels, but the death theme, it seems to me, is at work here, and it would explain this sandwiching technique. Also, there might be something else. There may be a subtle hint to the disciples, both then and now. If John dies because of righteousness, if Jesus dies because of righteousness, even more because of righteousness, can we expect anything different for ourselves as far as persecution? We should not be surprised at persecution. Our master was persecuted before us. So I throw those out as possibilities. So picking up with verse 30, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and they had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away, excuse me, to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he said to them, "You give them something to eat." And they said, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, excuse me, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided 2 fish among them all, and they all ate and were satisfied. And he took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Okay, so the disciples come back. Jesus recognizes that they are tired from this mission that they have been on. And so he calls them to go apart, which has to mean that they were going to a desolate place. It says it, in fact. They're going away to rest. Because where they were, there were just a lot of people, and we've seen it before. He was just surrounded. People were wanting to touch him. They were wanting him to heal them or their friends or their relatives. And he's getting away from the press of the crowds. So he went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. But people saw that they were going and ran ahead of them. And so there's a large crowd. We're told at the end, 5,000 men. We'll come back to that. And when he landed, he saw the great crowd. He had compassion on them. Said that they were like sheep without a shepherd. He teaches them. It gets late. The disciples say, these people are famished. They're hungry. So send them away so they can go buy something to eat. He says, "You feed them." they say, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat, which wouldn't have fed all of them adequately. He asks, what do you have right now? They have 5 loaves and 2 fish. He takes the 5 loaves, he commands them to sit down on the ground. Green grass, we'll come back to that too. They sat down in groups. He divides the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, has his disciples distribute it. Everybody eats, everybody's satisfied, and they've got 12 baskets of broken pieces left over, 12 baskets of broken pieces of bread and of fish left over. Now, on one of the things I'll say about this is in the Gospels, you have, and we've seen this more than once, but in the Gospels, in a sense, the best analogy I can think of is the gospel. Each of the 4 Gospels is like an onion. You can peel back successive layers. On one layer, on the first layer, things are perfectly clear, and I'm not there. There's nothing wrong with that layer. We see Jesus, we see him healing, we see him casting out demons, we see him teaching, we see something about his teaching and so on. But as you read them more and more and think more and more in depth, and as you become better acquainted both with the specific gospel, the Gospel of Mark in this case, and as you become more familiar with the Old Testament, the more you begin to see that there are other things at play. Also, as you know something about historical background, you may say, you may think that that's kind of a waste of time. It's not. All the historical cultural backgrounds are doing is giving us what the early readers already knew. They already knew who Herod was. They knew his reputation. They know some background to some things we're going to talk about here. They already knew this. We need some help in learning it. So anyway, on one level, what you've got is a pretty spectacular miracle. I mean, take 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and feed 5,000 men. And Matthew, by the way, records this same incident, only he says 5,000 men plus women and children. And the word for men here is a specific word for men. It's not generic for people. There is a generic term in Greek for people. This isn't it. He's saying 5,000 males, and Matthew made the same point. He said 5,000 males besides, and women and children besides. So, I mean, that's a spectacular miracle within itself. But when you look more closely, you have to ask, so why? Why does he do it? Where is this coming from? And I want to make 2 points. One is Mark expects his readers, at least some of his readers, to know their Bibles. And at that point, their Bible was the Old Testament. He expects them to know that. And if they know that, then there are certain things that Jesus does and says that will resonate with them. This is like that. Okay. And so the feeding of the 5,000, one of the things that would resonate is this is like Moses, in the days of Moses, God feeding the people they're in the desert. They're in the middle of nowhere, and God provides food miraculously for them. It's like that. It's not exactly the same, but it's like that. And I believe this fits with the theme of Jesus as the new, he's the Messiah, he's the new Moses. He's creating a new Israel. And we also see it at the end when they pick up what's left over, and what's left over is more than they had to start with. But the number is 12 baskets full. We got 12 again, 12 patriarchs, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles, 12 baskets, new Israel. It's pointing to that. There's something else that's going on here too. Remember, in the past, we've talked about how the expectation for the Messiah during the time of Jesus was that he would be a military man. He would come and he would defeat the Romans. He would drive them out. He would set up a new, wonderful, glorious kingdom in Israel that would rival the glory days of David and Solomon. In this incident, I believe we have evidence for the popular expectation. It's somewhat subtle, but it's here. We start with there were 5,000 men. Why 5,000 men? Why is he just being chauvinistic? 5,000 men? And he doesn't even mention that there are women and children there. Matthew does, but he doesn't even mention that there are women and children. He just says 5,000 men. Also, notice these guys come out to where Jesus is taking the disciples, which is in the middle of nowhere. Why did they go into the middle of nowhere? When he comes ashore, he sees them because they're like sheep without a shepherd. Now, sheep without a shepherd can simply mean they're leaderless. But in the Old Testament, that was used in military terms. Sheep without a shepherd was an army without a general. Then you have him seating them on the green grass. Why is that detail there? I mean, just said they were seated. Well, it's green grass. What that means is it was spring. That's when the grass is green in that area. The Jews believed that the Messiah would come at Passover. That's in the spring. And the Galilean Jews believed that the Messiah would come to Palestine in the spring of the year. Every spring, the Romans got nervous because there was some Jews that were going to revolt because they thought the Messiah was coming in the spring and they were ready. And this is spring of the year. 5,000 men out in the middle of nowhere, like sheep without a shepherd. And it's spring. He has them sit down, and it says in groups. And when they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. If you go back to your Old Testament, you'll find that those are military configurations, military units. I believe what we have going on here is that these 5,000 men were not out there primarily to be healed or to have demons cast out. They weren't out there as happy disciples wanting to hear about the lilies of the field. These are revolutionaries. I'm firmly convinced of it. They're revolutionaries, and they're ready to fight. And they think that Jesus is the Messiah, or at least he'll bring on the Messiah, and they're ready to fight. Now, if you think I've stretched this too much, the feeding of the 5,000 is one incident that's recorded in all four Gospels. In John 6, this same incident is recorded. And at the end of the account, it says that Jesus, perceiving that they were about to seize him and make him king, there it is. They're revolutionaries. He's our man. He's our king. So I believe that's what's going on here. So on one level, what Jesus is teaching is that he's inaugurating the new Israel, and this is like that. And you see the power of God at work in him. On another level, we see what's going on in the people's minds. They have a certain expectation of what the Messiah is, and they're working it out. And it doesn't finish here. And you will notice right after this incident, he feeds them. And then verse 45, immediately he made his disciples get into a boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. Immediately, notice the wording, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat. That is strong language. He didn't just suggest they get in the boat. He made them get in the boat. Why would he do that? probably because these are the worst ones. These are the ones who are ready to lead the revolt. So he makes them get into the boat, and once they're out, once the ringleaders are out of the way, he then dismisses the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astonished. For they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Okay, he makes his disciples get in a boat. He sends them across the water. By the way, we don't know exactly where they are at this point, but remember, he was on the Jewish side, on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. They've gotten in the boat and they've gone to a desolate place. Probably the best guess is they've gone to the southeast, but wherever they are, they're now going back. They're going to Bethsaida, so they're going back apparently to the other side. That's what makes most sense to me, but it's not totally clear where they were. So he sends them off. He dismisses the crowd. He goes up, it says, on the mountain to pray. Now, this may be symbolic. There's no mountain there. There are hills, there are ravines. There's really nothing we'd call a mountain, although we used to live in the Niagara Peninsula, and the escarpment runs along the Niagara Peninsula. And in the area, it was known as the mountain. Well, we had some people who moved from Colorado to the area, and the kids looked at the escarpment, which is a high hill, is what it is. I mean, it's a real high, but okay. They looked at it. They had moved from Colorado, and they looked at this and they said, "That's not a mountain. We know what mountains look like, and that's not it." So it could be that, in comparison, this is a mountain, but I suspect there's something else going on here. When Moses received the 10 Commandments, he went up in the mountain. When he was face to face with God, he was up in the mountain. When Elijah had a revelation of God, he was up in the mountain. And there may be some symbolism there that Jesus goes to the mountain to pray. The boat's out in the sea. We're told it's the fourth watch of the night, which would be between 3 and 6 o'clock. That was the fourth watch. He sees them out on the sea. He comes to them walking on the sea. Now, they don't realize it's him at the beginning. And who can walk on the sea? Well, nobody can walk on the sea. It must be a ghost. So they are terrified. They're trapped. They're in the boat. They can't leave the boat. There's a storm, and here's this ghost, according to their belief, and so they're terrified. He speaks to them. Jesus speaks to them and says, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." It is I could be translated, I am. Take heart, I am. Now, it is I is a perfectly good translation, but it could also be translated I am. And if it may be that it is there's a double meaning here. On one level, he's saying, "It's me, don't be afraid." But on another level, he is making a reference, I think, to Exodus 3:14, where Moses said, who am I to tell when I go to the people of Israel in Egypt, what am I to tell them? Who am I to tell them sent me? And he said, tell them I am sent you. I am. I always have been. I always will be. I simply exist. I am. And and going along with that, in the Old Testament, in Job and in the Psalms, in Job 9, you can look at verses 8 and 11. It speaks of God walking on the sea. And Psalm 77 also speaks of God walking on the sea. And again, I think Mark expects at least some of his readers to understand that, to pick up on that only God can do this, and that the Old Testament spoke of God on the waters.
Jim?
I will mention one other thing. Also, it says that he was going to pass them by, and the same kind of terminology is used in Job about passing by on the water. Yes, Kirk.
Is my mic still on?
Yes.
One of the other undercurrents that's here, obviously, is that Herod and that Herodian family were not Jews. I went for a long time thinking they were Jews. No, they were Edomites. They were Idumeans. And this was the perennial, notorious enemy of Israel. The Edomites were from Petra, and they were not Jews, and Herod was not a Jew. And so I believe underneath all of this is the fact that there is this ongoing conflict with that as well.
Yeah, the Jews did not. Herod claimed to have converted to Judaism, so he claimed to be a Jew, but I don't think they ever accepted him as one. And
his wife was a Persian who had been married to a sorcerer. Herod the Great's wife. He loved her so much he put her to death.
Well, he had wives, so that it was real dangerous. It was real dangerous to be.
It's safer to be his pig than to be his son.
In fact, there was an emperor that said it's safer to be Herod's pig than his son, and he made a play on words. Actually, they sound alike.
Pig and son sound very much alike.
Hey, so yeah, it was pretty.
But he was notoriously an Edomite. He was not a Jew, and that just exacerbated all of this that's underflowing that I think you're talking about has been exacerbated by the fact that you understand that Herod did not like Jews, and Jews did not like Herod because he was an Edomite. And that man killed the best man that was on the face of the earth. Jesus will say that in Luke, that John was the best man born of woman.
Yeah.
And so this is a tremendous insight you've given us. I appreciate it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Jim, it's Molly.
Yes, Molly.
I got here 5 minutes late, so I am here. But I wanted to mention something that I just recently discovered. In all the sermons that I have heard on the feeding of the 5,000 and the 12 baskets, I've heard the word scraps, left over. And this is not scraps left over. I mean, when I feed a meal, Charlie may leave a scrap of broccoli or a scrap of this on his plate, and I sweep it off into the disposal. But this is not scrap when he says 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of fish, Jesus, just a verse or two earlier, he broke the bread. So this is really a miracle of not just enough to satisfy the people, but an abundance of leftovers that could have fed another whole bunch of people. So that was something that I've just kind of realized lately. But I wanted to ask you, did I understand you to say that it's a possibility that when he, in verse 45, he immediately made his disciples, that this might not have been his 12, it might have been some other ringleaders in the crowd that were trying to stir him up to be the military leader? Or did you say that maybe his own 12 were being stirred up to be military leaders? What did you say?
I don't know that I said it that definitely, but what I know what was in my head, and that was that the disciples in the boat were the 12. I don't know if there were more than that, but I believe it's the 12, and I believe that they were very likely the would-be ringleaders for a revolt.
Okay, thank you. That
And we will see
clarifies it.
more of this later on in chapters 8 through 10, which I look forward to looking at some depth. We will see that they argue about which one's the greatest. They want to be seated on his right hand and his left hand, which is the places of power in the coming kingdom in their view, and so on. We'll see more of this. I think that their expectations of Jesus were not spiritual. They would have seen them as being spiritual because they believed this is what the Messiah had come to do, but they didn't grasp what he really came to do. And we'll come back to it, but I take these to be the 12.
And he went to pray. He sent them away and he went to pray,
Yeah.
which shows the tremendous contrast of what he's about and what they were about.
Yeah. And we'll see that. You see that over and over again. Okay, let's continue here. Oh, I will make one more comment about verse 52. Well, more than that. He says, I am, which I believe is he's identifying himself with the Heavenly Father. He gets into the boat with them. The wind ceases. They are astonished. And what I find 52 kind of fascinating, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. One of the themes of Mark is the misunderstanding of the 12. They just continually misunderstand what's going on. And actually, I think we should find that, I find it comforting. If you've ever found yourself being wrong-headed or not understanding or headed in the wrong direction, you're in good company with the disciples, because the apostles spent a lot of time being confused and not really understanding what Jesus was about. We'll see more of that as we go on. And it speaks of their hearts being hardened. That's interesting to me, because that idea of hearts being hardened appears a number of times in Mark, and in different contexts. You've got the hard-heartedness of the Jesus opponents, the religious leaders, And they're really, really hard. I mean, they're absolutely against him and ready to kill him. The disciples also have hard hearts, but they're not ready to, they're not going to kill him. They think they're all for him. And yet their hearts are hard in the sense of they don't see, they don't hear what he's really about.
So this is chapter 8. If you look in chapter 8, he cites both of these feedings. He cites both of them and says, don't you still understand? Don't you get it?
Yeah.
If he could do that, with all those leftovers, in spite of the fact that they're not, Molly called them scraps, obviously, but what he's getting them to try to understand is that this is a spiritual kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's continue here. Verse 53. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of the Gennesaret, or they came to land at Gennesaret and moored on the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him, and they ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch him, that they might touch even the fringe of his garment, and as many as touched it were made well. In a way, this is kind of a summary verse. They have come back now to land. They're in definitely in a Jewish area. People recognize him. They start bringing the sick friends and relatives, and they just want the sick in the marketplace just to be able to touch the fringe of his garment, because they know how much authority and power there is in him. Then we'll pick up in chapter 7. In chapter 7, there's actually a long section here. It has two parts, but it's a long section that goes down through verse 23. I'll start by reading the first part of it. And when the Pharisees gathered to him with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, they saw that some of his disciples ate with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, holding to the tradition of the elders. And when they came from the marketplace, they do not eat until they wash. And there are many other traditions that they observe, such as the washing of cups and pots and copper vessels and dining couches. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? And he said to them, well did Isaiah say, prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain they do worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men. I'll stop at that point and then we'll pick up. There's more about this, but we've seen it before. The Pharisees and the scribes, who were mainly Pharisees themselves, had a mutual admiration society, and they based their belief system on the tradition of the elders. They believed that the law was made of, there was a written law, scripture, and there was an oral law, tradition of the elders. And in practical terms, the tradition of the elders became more important to them than scripture. I don't know that they would have said that, but if you look at how they operated, that's in fact the way that it's just the way they operated. And this whole idea about washing hands wasn't just washing hands. You'll notice they wash hands, but they also wash objects. This was not a matter of cleanliness. They didn't have the same view of germs and all that that we do. And so this isn't, they cleansed, they had clean hands. They washed the dirt off and the disciples didn't know. That's not it at all. The cleansing here has to do with ritual cleansing. And the Pharisees believed that their hands and the implements that they used to eat all needed to be ritually cleansed so that they wouldn't be defiled. And they saw that his disciples were not walking according to the tradition of the elders. They had defiled hands, not ritually pure. And Jesus' first answer, he's going to have a follow-up to this, but his first answer is, well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites? He calls them hypocrites. And by the way, the word hypocrite originally was not a negative term. When we hear hypocrite, we hear negative. But at the beginning, the term itself was not negative. It was neutral. It meant somebody who played a part. It was used of actors on the stage. They were hypocrites because they played a part. We can see how that came to be used of religious, spiritual hypocrites who play a part. It's not real. It appears to be real. They make it look good, but it's not real. So he calls them hypocrites. They're just playing a part. And then he quotes Isaiah chapter 29, in which Isaiah confronted the people of his day by saying, well, it's God through Isaiah. God says, this people honors me with their lips. Outwardly they honor me, but their hearts are far from me. In vain, they worship me because they're teaching doctrines and commandments of men. And that's exactly what the Pharisees and scribes were doing. And so there's a twofold condemnation here. One is that it's an outward show rather than an inward reality. And the other is that they have substituted their own commandments created by people rather than the command of God. And we still see that where there's a divide between this is what God says and this is what tradition says. So, and tradition here is human tradition. There are the traditions of God. That's something that's different. I mean, for instance, the Lord's Supper is a tradition, but it's a tradition that comes from God. It's the tradition of God. It's not a human tradition. And human traditions aren't bad within themselves, but they become bad when they trump the word of God, when they become a substitute or a way around what God has actually said. And so then he confronts them with a specific kind of example, starting with verse 9. And he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and mother, and whoever reviles father and mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or mother, whatever you would have gained from me is korban, that is given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father and mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down, and many such things you do. Okay, background to this. He quotes scripture he says that they are in violation of Scripture. They reject the command of God, and he starts out with the command of God, which comes from Exodus 20 and 21, the passages that he's referring to. One of them says, honor your father and mother. That's 10 commandments. Law of Moses says, whoever reviles father and mother shall surely be put to death. So the idea of honoring father and mother is very much, is very important. In fact, it can be a life and death matter if you revile them. And the way Jesus shows the 10 commandments are principles. And we make a mistake if we only see the command in them and don't see the principle behind them. And Jesus is looking at the principle behind them.
Exactly
Honoring
right.
father and mother is more than just saying nice things about them. It is doing for them. It is caring for them as well. That's how you honor them in those ways. And so he says, here's the command of God, but if a man tells his father or mother, what you would have gained from me is Korban. Korban is given to God. And the whole idea behind that was, this is something that's pledged to God. Sounds good, doesn't it? You have pledged your money to God. But the thing was, you could pledge your estate, you could pledge your money to God, and you still had use of it for the rest of your life. But you couldn't give it to anyone else, including your parents. Even if they were in need, this has been given to God. Now, of course, I still have possession of it, and it's still taking care of me, but I can't give it to you. I can't do anything for you. So what he says is, you've set aside the command of God, which is to honor your father and mother. You've set that aside with tradition, Korban. I've made this vow to God. So he's giving a specific example of how human tradition can contradict and trump in people's minds the actual command of God. And he continues, and this relates to what he's just said. And he called the people to him again and said to them, hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him, but only things that come out of a person that are what defile him. And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. And he said to them, then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from the outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled? Thus he declared all foods clean. And he said, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these things come from within, and they defile a person. What he's done is he's turned the tradition of the elders on its head. What he said is, they have it exactly backwards. It's not what goes into you. See, the hands need to be ritually pure, because if you use defiled hands, then you're defiled by eating. What he's saying is, it's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you, it's what comes out of you. What goes into your mouth goes into your stomach and out through the bowel system, but what's in you is in your heart. It comes out of your heart, and that's what really defiles. That's an important principle, and it's an important principle today, because people very often have a tendency to think if you clean up the outside and the outside looks real good, the person must be good. Well, no, not necessarily. Now, Should we be good on the outside? Absolutely. Don't understand me to say that we shouldn't be good on the outside, but it needs to come from the inside. It's not just an outward show. It's an inward reality that shows itself in the way we treat other people, in the way we relate to God, and what we say and what we do. And so they have it backwards. They think that what they eat, how they eat it, that is what will defile them, when the truth is defilement comes from the inside and comes out. Now, there's one thing here that probably there may be a question mark about, when he says in verse 19, thus he declared all foods clean. Elsewhere in Matthew, Jesus says, if anybody violates one of the least strokes of a pen of the law, they're condemned. So it would be unthinkable for Jesus to be violating the law, and he never violated the law. He violated tradition, but he never violated the law in his life on earth. My take of this, when he says, thus he declared all foods clean, that this is looking on beyond the present incident and after the resurrection. Because in the early church, through the word of God, they came to see that clean and unclean foods were no longer valid. If Jews still wanted to practice that in the early church, they allowed that. Practice it, but don't force that on anybody else, and don't think that that's a means to your salvation. And remember, Peter had a problem with that when he saw the vision in Acts 10, and there was all this all these unclean animals, and he was told to take and eat. He said, "Oh, I've never eaten anything unclean," and he came to realize that was actually a kind of parable. It was symbolic that people are not unclean either. What God has cleansed is clean. So I would take this to be something that is looking forward. Mark's looking forward to after the resurrection.
Jim,
Yes.
in verse 4, they washed all kinds of things, and the Greek word is baptismos, moose. They baptized their cups and their utensils and their bronze vessels. And now you got me to thinking, I'm fearful that they didn't get themselves baptized, because that's what Mark's going to say. He that believes and is baptized shall be saved at the end. And I'm just wondering if that's what Peter sort of told Mark. They would be very careful to wash all their utensils, immersing. That's the word. It's the Greek word baptizo in that verse, but they wouldn't do it for themselves. They didn't see religion as an internal relationship, spiritual relationship with God. They saw it as external, washing cups and baptizing their cups. They would baptize their cups, but not themselves. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it shows some of the
duplicity.
Yeah, and I was going to say blindness.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's see. Well, we're out of time. We will pick up with verse 24 next time. And my plan is going to be to finish chapter 7 and 8 next time. And chapter 8 is a very important chapter.
Amen. Amen.
And
good study, Jim.
We will see a lot there.
Oh, yes.
And it relates to a lot of the things we've already seen. It relates to the disciples finally get it, apparently, and then you find out they don't get it as well as they appear to get it. And I think what we're going to find is there's still that conflict. And if we're honest with ourselves, we know that that too often has been within us. Here's Jesus, and here's my perception of Jesus, and they need to be together. And so often, my perception is pretty wide of the mark of who he really is. And that's what we see going on with the disciples. We will see in chapter 8 that they're getting there, but they're not there yet. They haven't figured it out. And again, chapters 8 through 10 are just a great passage, and a great passage in discipleship, and give us real insight into what it means to be a disciple and what it means to really understand Jesus.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Let's have a
Thank
prayer,
you.
and if anybody has any questions or comments, I'll entertain those for a little bit before we go on. Our Father in heaven, we thank you. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for the knowledge that in him you were revealing yourself to us, that you were at work in Christ, reconciling the entire world to yourself. Father, help us to understand discipleship and to be disciples from the inside out. Help us to understand, help us to be ready to live and to surrender ourselves to you in every way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Praise the Lord. Good stuff.
I believe I got everybody. I've been taking attendance as we've gone along. So Molly, even when you came in a little bit after we started, I did get you.
Yeah, I came in while you were reading the first passage. Kirk, you mentioned you had some articles on demons and demonic activity during the life of Jesus.
I do.
I would love to have some of those. Can you mail them to me? You still
Absolutely,
have a mailing
Jerry.
address?
I'll be glad to. Be more than glad to.
I would love that.
And it seemed like in the 70s, I can't remember. When was that decade where evil was being spoken of, and there was a lot of discussion about wickedness and demon possession and all of that. I can't remember when that was, but I've never thrown any of that stuff away. I just kept it, and it matches my study in angels. So yeah, I'll be glad to get that on to you. It really was a profound study at that time. We had a lot of people that was it the movie The Exorcist? Maybe that was the coming out of that movie or something like that, that got people all stirred up.
Mhm.
And
There was a lot of discussion of it in the 70s, as I recall. It may have started before that, but
there was one of the teachers that I had wrote a book called Demons, 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 John Newport, and ultimately taught at Rice. And Dr. Newport truly believed a very level, very sane approach to this, but he never denied it. And another one of my teachers wrote his doctoral degree on the biblical doctrine of demons and angels, and it was formidable. It was an incredible study. They were very interested in taking that seriously, but not going overboard. I think that's one time Linda and I were taking a girl home from church, and we let her out and we said, let's just walk you to the door. And she said, yeah, I'd like for you to come in. So we all three walked to the door. She said, stop, wait a minute. And she opened the door very carefully, and we stood there for a while and said, it's gone. It's gone. So she is letting the demons out of her house. And it was just crazy. Those times were crazy. Oh,
Yeah, I would like those articles too.
but now a man of your stature is going to find them formidable. No, I'm just teasing, Jim.
Well, I don't know if this is one of the ones you were referring to. It's not an article, but Everett Ferguson wrote
Yes.
a book. Wrote a
Yes.
book on demons.
Yes, he did. I think I may have some
It had been a
excerpts.
series of lectures
Yes.
at
Hold on,
a
wait just
university in Mississippi.
hold on, wait just a minute.
So Molly, how are you?
Good. Doing good. Been a busy day. We spent the
understand.
weekend in Abilene, and then we hit the, we've been running crazy ever since we got home. Busy.
Hendricks in graduate school was just absolutely, yeah, this is a good article. I don't know who wrote it. I've got Demons Are Real, which is a very fine article. This is Systematic Theology, which I had to take, and Jim knows what I'm talking about. Here's John Warwick Montgomery, Exorcism is for real. Is it for real? That was an article from Christianity Today. Now, these are Brotherhood guys. Rudell White wrote 3 articles on demons. And then Roy Lanier Sr., Demon Possession Today. So I'll make copies of all this. J. Noel Meredith was one of the great scholars in the Brotherhood years ago. I imagine Charlie would recognize J. Noel Meredith. He wrote on demons. These are all good articles. I didn't write them.
You're saying they're good, although you didn't write them?
That's correct. That's correct. Oh, I forgot. What do you know about Satan? I developed 100 true-false questions on what do you know about Satan? And then on Halloween night, this was so popular that we gathered at the church building and studied demons. It was a good study. We had everybody was to come in a costume for fun, But we had a good study that night. I remember. Yeah, I'll get this for you. It'll take me a little bit of time, but I'll get it for you. And Jim, you said you wanted a set too.
Sure.
I may be selective, you guys.
Oh, yeah.
It's a pretty big
do.
one. It's a pretty big file.
Please do. I will.
I think J. Noel Meredith, I think the era of the early Restoration movement, they were not fascinated by demons. They believed in it. That was real stuff for them. I don't know exactly the beliefs of people like Campbell and people like that, but I do know they took it very, very seriously. I don't think we do.
No.
Dr. McCord was always very careful to point out that demon possession was not epilepsy. He was well studied in this, and he just wanted to make sure that they are distinguished, that demon possession is not an illness. And for whatever reasons we can go for, I'm not sure exactly why, except by the grace of God and the power of Jesus, that we don't have what we call possessions that are a little bit more evident. I think the gospel has pushed it back. But when I was a missionary in Cameroon, there were things that happened that were not cute. That was not Halloween stuff. And there was a lot of juju in Cameroon when I was there. The medicine man, I was preaching one night out in the bush, and the witch doctor, juju man, walked through the crowd. And as some of you know, when Africans are embarrassed, they laugh. And everybody laughed, and I couldn't figure out why they were laughing. But they were taking that very seriously. When they're embarrassed, they were very embarrassed about my response to this. And they just knew that I didn't believe in that. And they laughed. All of them laughed as if I had cracked a really funny joke. They took that very, very seriously. There were a bunch of native preachers that came together, and a brother came and said, I have an enemy, and he's put a curse on my house. And he told the preachers, who were Africans, please come over and pray inside my house so my house won't fall on me. Because they said, because I'm a Christian, if I go in my house will follow me because it has a spell on it. Well, the Anglo missionary from the States said, I'm ready to go. And the Africans would not let him go because he didn't believe in demon possession. And they believed that. They believed that we don't believe in demon possession, and they did. And he had to have somebody come over to his house and use stronger medicine, which was God's medicine or Jesus' power, so the curse would leave his house. Most people in the world today, I think, are far more aware of the presence of evil and the devil. When was the last time you heard a good sermon on the devil? That's the way I like to say it. There are no good sermons on the devil.
You know, Kirk, though, I believe the outpouring of the Holy Spirit within believers' hearts. You know, Jesus said, he that is within me, right, is greater than he that is in the world.
Yes. Yes.
You know, I think believers must not be fearful that they could be attacked by demons. I just do not believe that if I am filled with the Holy Spirit of God, which I do believe, he is more powerful, and he will not allow that.
That's exactly right.
Fight against that.
But we need to take it very seriously.
Yeah.